let's go to our guest line. Bring on our next guest today. Good friend of the program, as we're pleased to be joined by Mike McAllister from 24/7 Sports. Mike, great to have you on. How are things?
Things are good. How are you?
We're doing well. Lots to talk about. I mean, the transfer portal, it's crazy for college athletics, but it's good for talk radio because it always gives us something to discuss.
Absolutely.
Kadari Richmond, let's start there. Decided on St. John's. I don't think that shocked anyone that he ended up at St. John's. How real of a possibility was Syracuse? I saw the ESPN article, and they put 5 schools in there. Syracuse was one of them. How real of a possibility was it for him to come here?
It was certainly quite a real possibility. I don't want to quantify it by saying it was very real or Syracuse finished a very close second. I don't really have any of that information, and the fact is, to our knowledge, he didn't visit. But I know he visited St. John's, and then right after he visited St. John's, the news came out that he had committed. I think if he had gone through that visit and didn't commit and was still looking to take other visits, I think Syracuse would have gotten one, probably the next one. So they were certainly in the mix, had a lot of conversations with him. Alan Griffin was his primary recruiter out of high school. That relationship remained very strong, so that certainly helped Syracuse. But ultimately, I think it came down to the fact that St. John's had missed on several players that they were considered to be the favorites for coming out of the portal, several big names. Cliff O is one of them. The forward from Miami is another one. And I think they basically got to the point where they couldn't afford another big miss with a player that they were considered to be the favorite for as soon as that player entered the portal. And, perhaps I don't know what the exact figures were in terms of what he got NIL-wise, but I'm sure they probably threw a ton more at him than they were originally planning. And, just to make sure that they basically didn't get themselves into a third situation where a high-profile guy that they were supposed to easily land, they end up not getting. But either way, tough for Syracuse because you thought if he comes, that potentially puts them in a preseason top 25 type conversation. But I still think with the moves that they've made that they're an improved team from the way the team was constructed last year.
Do you think this was just a case of, hey, it's Kadari Richmond, the number one guy in the portal, we got to get him, or are they still looking for a guard?
Well, I think both. I think Kadari was a player that we know how talented he is. Obviously, remember the discussions years ago when he was here, but there's no question that he would have been, a big get in terms of buzz, hype. We know how talented he is. And given his size, I think he gives you a lot of versatility in terms of what you can do with your lineup. So it was one of those where I think he was too good to say no to, but at the same time, I still think they're going to be looking in the portal for a guard that can come in and make an impact. That doesn't necessarily mean someone who is going to start. If Kadari came, he would have started, and then Jaquan Carlos would have backed him up. I think now you could get someone who comes in and is the backup to Jaquan Carlos, or those two are going to battle it out for the starting spot. I don't think it's a guarantee that whoever you look at now is definitely going to come in and start.
All right, so they've got 3 scholarships left. How do you think they divvy up those 3 scholarships? Do they end up using them all? And if so, who are they going after?
Yeah, I think there is a chance that they look at them all or that they fill them all. Now, I don't have specific names like they're after this guy and this guy and this guy. They've done a tremendous job in the modern era of sports and media and all that stuff at keeping a lot of things very close to the vest in terms of what they're doing, who they're targeting, visits, all of that stuff. So, kudos to their staff. Stinks for us because, we want to know and fans want to know and whatever else, but you certainly understand why they want to try to hold things close throughout this process. But if I'm Syracuse, I'm looking for a guard that's kind of a combo that can play the 1 or the 2. I'm looking for a big that could also potentially play the 4 if needed, but specifically looking for a big that would be, sort of battle it out with Naheem McLeod for the backup spot. And then I'm looking for a wing that could be Chris Bell's backup in the case that Chance Westry has another injury setback. Those are the 3 areas that I would look at if I was on staff and I was in Red's shoes.
I got 2 questions for you. I want to piggyback off what you just said. Do you think it's good that Syracuse keeps it close to the vest because you don't end up in a St. John's situation where people realize that you're whiffing on all these people, or do you think it's better to have it out there?
Well, there's pros and cons to both. Now, from where I sit, I like to know it all because that gives me more content, more stuff to talk about with fans, more things to banter about with fans, and discuss how players would fit and all that type of thing. But at the same time, it does prevent some of that negative publicity. I mean, think about the Dakota LeFew situation. We know Syracuse was involved. He visited. They wanted him, etc. He doesn't come here, and the conversation went from, is he really that big of a difference maker, to, oh my God, the sky is falling now that the non-difference maker is not coming. So you avoid some of those conversations when you keep things close to the vest. And also, if there's a player that you really like, look at Jaquan Carlos. Syracuse really liked him, and he visited and then committed. And yet there wasn't a whole bunch of conversations around the fact that he was visiting and Syracuse was pursuing him and all of that. If you like a player a lot more than other schools do, and you keep that a little bit close to the vest, maybe it prevents another school from taking a harder look at that player. So there's some of that as well. Ultimately, though, the schools are going to do what they think is in their best interest, and the less information is out there, the better it probably is from their side of things.
I don't even know what this question means, Mike, but it's come up in our chat multiple times. There's apparently a high school student out there named Brooklyn Vic. Is that a realistic thing that he could play at Syracuse?
I think he's a created player on the NCAA video games, and that's what the name sounds like, right?
Yeah.
No, he is a high school player that he posted on Instagram, I don't know, a month and a half ago, whatever it was, that he had committed, and then we saw the post and reached out to some sources, and they indicated that he hadn't committed. There's a little bit of miscommunication on whether or not he was offered and all of that. This is what I know. He is a legitimate prospect. Syracuse does like him and has communicated with him. I think once they decide that they're done with adding players through the transfer portal, if there is a scholarship available, I think he is a realistic option to take one of those final scholarships. He's not someone that would be viewed as coming in to help right away, but someone that they look at and say, in a year or two, he could be someone that contributes for us. But
Mike,
he is someone that's on their radar for sure.
This came up between Steve and I yesterday, and I want to ask you right now. Do you think it's more important for Syracuse to even maybe just give the scholarships to a walk-on, say, if they don't have a guy, instead of going out and getting somebody with multiple years of eligibility left with a transfer portal now?
There is a case to be made for that. I think it would depend on how comfortable they feel with the depth on their roster. If they feel like they're good, they trust that Chance Westry is going to be healthy all year. Same thing with Naheem McLeod. They think that between those two guys and what they have around the rest of the roster, they're good as far as the center position goes. They think they have enough guards and all of that. Then, yeah, I think taking one or two and giving them to a hardworking walk-on is, those are always fun things to watch, those reveals on social media and things like that. But ultimately, Red's job is to make sure that his roster is complete as possible. And if he thinks that there's still holes and gaps and weaknesses, then he's going to use those on bringing in players from the portal or from the junior college ranks or from the high school ranks.
All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk a little bit of football before we let you go. We're seeing these reports about Kalen Ellis no longer with the program. What can you tell us about that situation?
Yeah, it sounds like it was a situation where it was just, kind of right for both sides to move on. And I know there was a lot of promise with him early in his career, right? He started some games as a true freshman, started 11 games as a sophomore, and then going into last year, there was a lot of high hopes for him continuing to develop, and injury issues just never worked out. And we know Syracuse has brought in a ton of transfer linemen this offseason, and I think it's kind of one of those where Syracuse is ready to move on. I'm sure he's ready to move on, and both sides can kind of go about the rest of this offseason in their careers, and separating of the ways was best for both sides. So it's just one of those that wasn't a medical situation like a medical disqualification or medical retirement or anything like that. Nothing I heard was that it was discipline related. I think it's just one of those where the fit just wasn't there, and it was time for both sides to go in different directions. As for
a couple of additions, Marcus Washington, defensive back from Louisville, started his career at Georgia. He's coming to Syracuse. And then Michael Johnson's son, Michael Johnson Jr., is coming here as well, was a quarterback for the last 3 years down in Florida, but is coming here as an offensive weapon. What can you tell us about these two guys?
Yeah, so Marcus Washington is a former 4-star recruit, top 150 player overall in his class, committed to Georgia. His primary recruiter was Fran Brown, so Fran really liked him out of high school. Spent a year at Georgia, transferred to Louisville, primarily played special teams for Louisville last season, and is coming back to reunite with Fran Brown, and Fran clearly thought that there was room to improve the secondary and add some more depth to it. So I think he's got potential to play special teams this year, have an impact there, and compete for a starting spot with some of the other guys. Now, he's played cornerback at his previous couple of stops, but I also think Syracuse is looking at the potential to move him to safety. So, have some versatility there, but very talented player that, Fran Brown thinks he can pull some stuff out of and help him realize that talent. As far as Michael Johnson Jr., he was, again, a very highly regarded recruit, started his college career at Penn State, transferred to Florida Atlantic, has battled injuries for multiple years, and last year was really the first year where he was healthy. And while he was technically listed as a quarterback, he also spent some time at running back and carried the ball a bunch, or at least some of the time for them. Last year hasn't really thrown very many passes over the last few years. But the offensive weapon thing, I think he's someone that you could see potentially, if he's, able to earn a spot in the rotation and cracking the lineup, that could line up as a wide receiver, could line up as a running back. You could do some trick plays with him where he can throw the ball a little bit and then gives you a little bit more depth at quarterback in an emergency situation. So, this someone I think that has the potential to be utilized in a variety of ways, assuming, of course, he can stay healthy. And then, again, he gets to play at the same school that his dad's coaching at, which he also did at Florida Atlantic. So kind of a cool connection there.
I like that. Could be a secret weapon. Trick plays.
Kind of like Slash.
Yeah, there you go.
Cordell Stewart.
There you go. Can do a lot of things. Mike, as always, thanks for the time. Thanks for the insight. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, Mike McAllister joining us here on the show. Quick break here. Today's business coming up next. And then Jason Belzer, the CEO of Student Athlete NIL. He'll join us at 1:30. We're back after this on ESPN Radio.